the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. Today, I sit down with some Baen authors and editors who are at DragonCon over Labor Day weekend to discuss just what makes the convention so special. All right, well, we are talking about DragonCon. DragonCon is, of course, the big science fiction, fantasy, media convention every year in Atlanta over Labor Day weekend. And since we're talking about a con, I thought maybe I would do the con panel thing and have all of my esteemed guests kind of introduce themselves. And we're going to talk about fun stories from DragonCon, tips for people who've never been, why you should consider coming, and just kind of have a grand old time, I think. But since we're virtual, I'll just say maybe on my screen here, Howard is next to me. So Howard, would you just say hey to everybody and kind of give them an idea of who you are if they haven't listened to the podcast when you've been on previously?
Sure. Well, you can see that I'm Howard Andrew Jones. My first Baen book just came out, a few weeks ago at this point, and my next one's coming in October. So the first one is Lord of a Shattered Land. It's a sword and sorcery epic adventure. Thank you, DJ or Dave or one of your many pseudonyms. My other background, I used to write for St. Martin's. I've done some Pathfinder novels, and I don't know about the rest of you guys, but this was my first time at DragonCon in like 11 years, only my second time in a while. So it kind of felt like an all new experience.
All right, great. Yeah, so we got not quite a newbie's point of view, but pretty close to it. Not a newbie's point of view. Dr. Robert Hampson. What do we call you on these podcasts? Do we call you Rob?
We call you either call me Rob or call me Speaker.
Okay,
either one works.
Right.
And for those who don't know, I am the speaker to lab animals. I am a research scientist in physiology and in neuroscience, and I teach medical school, and I also teach graduate students in the medical sciences how to communicate, which is actually how I got at DragonCon in the first place. And I've been going since 2008. And I split my time across a number of tracks. Several of them are science and space, where I try to put into practice what I teach.
Very good. And also bringing us the Filk point of view and maybe some other points of view as well, Mr. Gray Reinhardt, Baen Slushmaster General.
Well, that's possibly enough of a introduction at all. To let folks know that I'm the guy who sees the unsolicited manuscripts that come in.
And you are also a Filker of some renown. So, and what is
and for folks who don't know,
yeah.
Filk is considered to be the music of science fiction and fantasy fandom in particular. Mikey Mason, friend of mine, calls it the soundtrack of fandom. And DragonCon has a very robust Filk music, Filk singing track that I've been pleased to be a part of for 10 or 11 years. And it this year was possibly one of the best of all the DragonCons that I've been to.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. DJ Dave Butler is our final guest today. You probably know him. If you listen to the podcast at all, you've probably seen him at least recently. But Dave, go. You can introduce yourself though too.
Thank you. I've been going to DragonCon since I want to say 2017, something like that. Which year I came out and I started attending some of the conventions in kind of Southern fandom, DragonCon and LibertyCon principally, but sometimes others, and been every year since, except the year when it was all virtual, which was the year I won the dragon. So Yes, I am a part-time Baen editor and writer. I'm not very good about proactively reaching out to the track heads. So the track that remembers me very well is alternate history. So I was on a bunch of alternate history panels this year.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, and I've been to DragonCon, I should say. I don't remember the first one, maybe 2015-ish, something like that. I missed the virtual one and then I missed the year after. But I've been there with Baen. Baen always we have our friend Glynis runs the Missing Volume bookstore that's always over in the dealer's hall, and we rent a corner out. So I am often there with some of the other Baen folk, helping do signings and greeting fans and all that. And then I'm also on some programming as well. Been doing more and more of that. So yeah, so we've all got some DragonCon credentials, some more than others. Howard, let's talk to you, since you, like you said, this is the first one in a long time, and really your second overall. So I remember the first DragonCon. I think it was Thursday night. I went to Trader Vic's because it's in one of the host hotels, and I'm a big tiki nerd. And I was drinking a Mai Tai next to Boba Fett and Slave Leia, and Mr. like they were playing the like Star Trek theme on a theremin, and I was like, "What is this?" So I think DragonCon is a lot, in a good way. Sometimes maybe a not so good way. It can be tiring. But what was your impression coming back to it after quite a while? Maybe we could talk to everybody's like first impressions of DragonCon, or things that stood out to you as like, whoa, when you first showed up.
Well, I'm a regular goer to Gen Con.
Okay.
It has a wonderful writers symposium, in addition to just Gen Con itself being awesome. So it has writers tracks too. And so, it's of a similar size. And it also has costumes. And my impression of Dragon Con, what I'd remembered was that it's even busier and the costumes are even more complex, but it's more spread out. And that was all true, but I forgot. I mean, I had specific memories of some very fine costumes, but then when you pass through the one hotel and there's like a million T-Rexes just hanging out there, Jim Zub commented, you could have body surfed across them one night. There were so many, or, it's just so spread out amongst so many different hotels, which is also different from Gen Con. Gen Con has a number of satellite hotels, but it's all anchored around the convention center. Well, this convention center is a little bit off to one side, and the dealer's room's on like 4 separate levels.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually took me a while to figure out how everything was all connected and where to get from here to there. But truly amazing. And there's no way to see it all because so much is happening at the same time. And I saw some great costumes, but I didn't even go to the costuming tracks. And I probably should have made time to go to the big, I know there was at least one costume contest, because then I imagine I would have seen even more amazing stuff.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any like early or first time DragonCon memories of just like, at least for me, yeah, like it was just like, what is this even? Or no, you guys are all pros. You probably like, no big deal.
Well, the thing about it is when I went in 2008, my day job for 40 years did not allow me the time. I worked day, evening, weekend, and frankly, in the sciences, there were some elements in which science fiction was frowned upon. Oh, those Trekkies. And I had been to a couple of events when I was about 25 years earlier, when they were little more than um, comic book shows in the local shopping mall. And that was, and I remember one from late 70s, early 80s, in which we had Nichelle Nichols, Uhura, come in and stage set up in the shopping mall. And that was it. They come in, they give a talk, they're there for, talk for about 20 minutes, answer questions for about 20 minutes, and they're gone. That's the entirety of the convention. So in 2008, for various reasons, I jumped into the deep end. I went to StellarCon, which is a small con was a small con in Central North Carolina. I went to LibertyCon, which is some of our absolute favorites among the Baen authors and fans. And then I went to DragonCon, and a friend of mine who went with me said, so it was quite obvious that Rob's brains dribbled out his ear and were left puddled somewhere on Peachtree Street because it was overwhelming. And this was back in days when you could actually get up the elevators in the hotels without having to wait for an hour. But it was absolutely overwhelming, the number of the costumes, the number of people you bumped into, going into the Walk of Fame and seeing celebrities that you could walk up to and talk to and things like that. It was just absolutely, I remember being absolutely overloaded.
I see Dave and Gray both like nodding. Do you guys have any like thoughts on that? Or
Well, the first time I went to DragonCon, it was only in the 3 hotels. I don't remember if it was 2006 or 2007. I was actually looking for my collection of DragonCon badges. I hadn't thought ahead to pick those up to see when the first one was I went to. And I actually stayed with a friend of mine at a little offsite motel, walked back and forth, and thought it was a lot of fun. I think there were only about 20,000 people there at the time. And went back the next year, took my family. We did a lot of the fan track stuff. Everybody had a great time. But then, we're going to add the Sheraton. We're going to add the Westin. And then, yes, the Dealers Hall, which was originally in the basement of the Marriott, outgrew that. So we're going to go to the America's Mart, and it ballooned and ballooned and ballooned. But I gotta say that my experiences at DragonCon have been fantastic in terms of meeting some of the coolest people, folks that I am friends with to this day from the very first one I went to. And as long as you don't mind occasionally rubbing shoulders with somebody, because you will as you're on the sidewalk or going from hotel to hotel, it's a blast.
Yeah, I have had 2 initial impressions, and I think they've sort of proved to be true, and they're a little bit in tension actually. So on the one hand, I found DragonCon very welcoming. I think this is my experience again in Southern fandom generally. And fandom generally is pretty welcoming, right? There are some cliques within it, and you can get yourself run over if you're not careful. But generally speaking, people are there for something they love, and if they think that you love it too, or you can be induced to love it, then they'll share with you, right? But DragonCon's very welcoming in a sort of a Mardi Gras kind of way. Everybody's sweaty. A lot of people are in costumes. Some people's costumes do not involve being fully clothed, right? And it's like it's welcoming like a big party. The other thing is it's so big, and it's so sprawling, and it grows or metastasizes, maybe depending on your point of view. But there's as a result, there's tradecraft. DragonCon has lore that you kind of need to get around. Rob's referred to some of this already, right? So here's like a piece of lore. Like if you're trying to go up or down on an elevator in one of the main hotels in DragonCon, when the elevator door opens and there's a space you get in, it doesn't matter if the elevator's going the wrong way, because you might not get a space going your way, right? You might wait for a long time. So you just get in when you can get in, right? That's how you operate at DragonCon. You got to know that. You want to know that the Hyatt, the Marriott, and the Hilton are connected by an air-conditioned bridge, right? And it's tricky in the Marriott because you got
somewhat air conditioned.
It's air conditioned until you put 40,000 sweaty bodies into it, right?
Back in the day,
overwhelms.
they didn't all used to be connected though.
Oh, interesting.
And
Interesting.
you had to get from the Marriott to the Hilton, you actually had to go down and cross the street.
Oh, interesting. See, and there's these, so there's these bits of. So here's another one. Saturday morning, there's going to be a parade. It's going to cut off. It's going to cut off Peachtree. So it's going to cut the con in half, right? But you can get under the parade by going down into the MARTA stop, right? So, hey, you want to meet a writer? Where do you go? Well, the bar at the Westin. Like all the writers sooner or later end up at the bar at the Westin, right? There's all these little bits of lore that you kind of have to go 2 or 3 times to become a comfortable DragonCon operator. But it's been worth it for me. I have a lot of fun. Get a lot done by certain measures of what constitutes work.
Yeah.
You have to learn about the food court and the secret food court.
Wait a minute, there's a secret food court.
There's a
We'll
secret
talk
food
off air.
court.
Let everyone know. Yeah, food is tricky, like, because those lines at the food court get crazy, and I remember
The
one time.
CVS on Peachtree runs out of stuff.
Yeah,
Get in there and it's like a pack of wolves has gone through and thoroughly depredated the place, right? All of the caffeinated drinks are gone. Yeah. So I like the bodega. If you exit the side door with the ramp out of the west, and there's a little bodega across the street from it. And that's my favorite. They don't seem to jack up the prices for the con. And I think they're just enough steps off of Peachtree that they don't get thoroughly sold out. So I've never gone in there and not been able to get, the Diet Coke or whatever it was I wanted.
there you
It's
go.
called
Everyone.
Peach Mart.
That's next to what used to be Pity Pat's porch.
I
Yes.
think that's right.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yes. Which I was actually, when you said that, I thought about Pity Pats, which is, I've only been going not nearly as long as Speaker and Gray, maybe longer than Dave. I don't know. We'd have to compare notes, but is there anything from DragonCon's past that was no longer around that you sort of miss? And the two to me is Pity Pat's porch, where we used to do the Baen brunch for all our authors, because that was like so good, those grits and fried chicken, man. So I do miss that. And then the other thing is now the famous carpet is where the Marriott that everybody wears.
Marriott. Yep.
Yeah. But I don't think I ever saw that. I don't remember when they changed that, but I missed, because the Hilton, they had the same carpet. They even filmed, I think, The Nice Guys, that Ryan Gosling, Russell Crowe movie there. And that's supposed to be in LA, because they had, so all these hotels, or at least a couple of them, have this like very 70s, that's when they were built, like brutalist sort of. And to me, it's perfect for DragonCon, because I feel like I'm like in Logan's Run or something, right? Like that, what we thought the future would look like in the 70s. But they used to have this orange, like such 70s carpet, and I do miss that. So is there anything, especially for the veteran, or Howard, you were here 11 years ago, maybe something you remembered that has changed that you kind of miss, and then we'll keep it positive and forward thinking from this point forward. Anything over time, that's changed?
Well, the only clear memory I had of my previous time was that it felt like there was one big convention hall, and then stuff related to comics was the floor below. And it was just so much easier for me to navigate that space than going up the floor. But I understand why you would move it to another place if it's just grown so big.
Yeah. Everybody else, only improvements. Is that what I'm seeing?
Well, the Hilton renovated their lobby about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they did was they took out an escalator that was in the, just inside the front door and to the right, which meant that you could get up to the meeting rooms, which for me is important because that's where Science Track and Space Track were. And you could get up to the meeting rooms without having to go all the way to the back of the Hilton and then come up the escalators where the whole crowd was. And there was a little market where you could buy sandwiches and things like that off to that side. And that's where the hotel check-in was. Because when I first started going, I was staying in the Hilton. And now I'm in the Hyatt most of the time. But I miss that escalator simply because when the crowds got really bad and I had to walk from the Hyatt to the Hilton, I would go outside. I mean, this shocking that you would go outside in Atlanta on Labor Day weekend in the heat and sometimes the rain and walk down or up that incredible 3-block hill to and I'd walk down to the Hilton. I'd go in the side door. I could go right up the escalator, right to the meeting rooms, and all of that's gone. And frankly, I miss that. And I suppose I'm sure that Hilton had some study that said this is going to be more efficient this way, but I miss them having an extra way to get up to the upper floor.
Just when you find the secret passageway, they board it off. Yeah.
Oh, they did that, and the Westin had a tunnel over to the America's Mart, which is where the dealers are now, and now that is closed off, and you can't go that way either. So
Yeah,
every
that
once in a
was
while they
very
close things on
convenient.
you. Yeah.
That was very convenient. I think I misspoke earlier. I think I said the Hilton when I meant the Hyatt, because it used to be the Hyatt. You would have to go out past what was the pool and then down and across the street
to get to the
to
Marriott.
get to the Marriott.
Right.
But I think the thing that I miss, I used to not stay in any of the con hotels. There was a hotel that was right across the street from the Westin and across the other street from the police station. And at the time that I started going and staying there, it was a Marriott property, not affiliated with the convention necessarily, but I could get in there. It was quieter. There were fewer people, and I didn't mind walking up and down a few blocks to be able to get that. But then they sold it. Somebody else bought it. I was no longer able to get rooms there, and that kind of became a little bit of a drag. But one of the things I'll say that I don't miss, or one of the improvements that I have seen, actually relates to the Filk track we were talking about earlier. When I first went to the Filk track at DragonCon, it was in the sub basement of the Hyatt in one of the tiny little rooms, and it was very hard to find. And sometimes they would have guys come and perform, and people would be sitting out in the hallway for an hour as if they were waiting to see, the cast of Star Trek in a big room. But they finally moved us into better, bigger digs, and it's been a lot more pleasant to be part of that track.
Yeah, one thing we're talking about. Dave, did you have something? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I'm not sure whether I missed this yet or not, but the Chinese restaurant I like that's 1 block away from the Westin, I tried to go, and it was closed during what appeared to be opening hours. So I'm afraid that my tradition of having one meal at Shoes might be over.
Yeah, that would be a great sadness
for me.
For you, I'm yeah, sure.
Maybe also for Shoe.
Maybe. If you went there more than once a year, maybe they could have stayed open.
Maybe I should have been there more often.
So we've been talking about these different tracks, and so let's talk about some panels. When my first panel I was ever on at a convention, I'd gone to a couple smaller literary cons just to go, and then I was working for Baen and come to DragonCon, and so I was an attending professional, or whatever we call us. We're not guests, we're like the next tier down. And so they put me on one panel. It was the first panel I was ever on. I was with like David Weber, John Ringo, Mike Williamson, and a couple other people on like a military science fiction panel. Luckily, I did not have to moderate it, thank goodness. But in a room of like 200 people, I was terrified. But over the years, I've done more and more, and I've also done other panels at other conventions. And I think this year, in the past, I've enjoyed them fine, but this year, I don't know, something was different, felt different, and it really clicked. And man, I just had a blast on all my panels this year. So I was wondering what that experience was like this year and in past years for everybody. Howard, maybe, um, was there any standout panels or moments, or what do you like about doing panels at DragonCon or in general? Or
I like a good panel. I mean, a lot of it depends on the moderator and the your fellow panelists. You've probably been on those panels at some point where there's someone who won't shut up, and they'll keep, as I mentioned in my book, they're just constantly trying to promote their book instead of just like trying to interact and share information that the audience would be interested in. So I really liked how well organized the panels were. For instance, instead of you having to remember to take your nameplate around with you, as I've had at other cons, they hand your nameplate out to you on the panel, and then the organizers will take that nameplate away. You can't go lose it or forget to take it to your next panel. They will make sure it's sitting in front of you. So that's pretty cool. I was only on 2 panels this particular time. I wasn't there for the full convention. And I was impressed by the moderators that they chose. They were well organized and they asked good questions. And the attendance was quite excellent. I didn't realize quite why one of them was packed to the gills, not knowing that there were some urban fantasy. I don't really follow urban fantasy romance. And so there were 2 apparently really well-known urban fantasy romance people. Like, oh, now I understand, because almost once the question session started, almost every question was directed to one or the other of them.
well, Dave, I know you talked about you had some like a liars panel or something. What was that? Like that sounded fun. Yeah.
The alternate history people are very good about creating panels that are more than just asking a series of prepared questions. So so one of the examples. So I'll give you 2 examples. So they do like a Mad Libs panel. I've been on this 3 years running, where they bring in, there's like 5 authors on the panel or something, and they take about a 1-page excerpt out of each writer's a novel by each writer, and they remove words, right, and leave blanks, and then they run that like a Mad Lib with the crowd, right? I need an adverb. Give me 2 adjectives. I need a color. I need a past tense verb, right? And you go through and then you read. You are handed your page usually, and you read. You can't tell what book it is until you get it, and then you're like, oh, okay. And that's usually very funny.
Yeah. Have you?
That sounds like it'd be a blast.
Did it improve where you're like, oh no, the second edition, I need to change.
I need to tweak it just like this. There were some. Oh man, I can't remember. You know how it is. Sometimes people are just inserting words that are funny in and of themselves, right? Moist, ointment. Right, like whatever the sentence is, it's going to sound ludicrous with that word in it. But then sometimes you end up with something that's, I'm trying to remember an example, and I'm not remembering one right now, where like the result is kind of perfect. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I was also on a panel where we were supposed to come prepped with obscure historical actual facts, and then also lies, and we just kind of we'd go down, we'd take a turn, everyone would tell, and you don't say whether you're lying or not, right? And then the audience has to sort of guess, right? Is it true that Queen Elizabeth had a flush toilet? Is it true that Samuel de Champlain was a bastard son of King Henry of France? Is it true that and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Yes, kudos to the alternate history track people.
Speaker, you talk about how you've been sort of have like what what's the metaphor I'm looking for? You're in a couple different worlds, I guess. On these tracks, you do a lot of the science stuff, but then some of the other things. So what for you stood out or has stood out in the past?
Well, the first DragonCon panel I can remember was Apocalypse Rising was the name of the track. And Apocalypse Rising was in later years, it went through a phase where it was all about the Walking Dead TV show. But in the earlier days, this was apocalyptic fiction. And I can remember listening to a panel in which Steve Sterling says, I killed off 5 billion people in Dies the Fire universe. And then Mike Williamson says, I killed off 6 billion people in The Weapon, the 6 billion people on Earth. And Ringo says, I killed off 17 billion people, left 1 million alive in his one of his universes, one of the very first ones he wrote. It's a sort of a future fantasy. And then Weber says, I killed off the entire Fifth Imperium. And they were all going on about killing off, how the end of the world would come. And it really kind of stuck with me. And I noticed they did another thing called preparation. They were heavily sponsored and involved with a group called Zombie Squad, and Zombie Squad is all about emergency preparation. Was, unfortunately, they have disappeared. I guess
Anything else you miss?
Yes, and they were talking about emergency preparation, how if you're, quote, prepared for zombies, you're prepared for a hurricane, you're prepared for a flood, you're prepared for a blizzard, for an earthquake, so on and so forth. And we were in a room in the basement of the Hyatt, and the lights went out. Half of the audience reached into their bag, pulled out their Surefire flashlights, and turned their flashlights on, and we continued the panel. And then it turned out that what it was is the way the rooms were set up, somebody had leaned against a light switch in another room and turned off our lights and didn't know it. But so I got started. The very first panel I ever did was as a panelist, as a non-attending pro, non-guest in Apocalypse Rising, because I was an Eagle Scout. I was at the time a assistant scout master and worked with the camping and the hiking and a lot of the emergency preparation. And so we did a panel on what's in your bug out bag. And so I ended up, when I first started as an attending pro and later as a guest, I am a scientist, so I end up in the science track, but I was doing work with Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop, which is now Interstellar Research Group, and met Rain Glenn, who is the track director for Space Track. And so she had me on Space Track panels, and I had written some short stories and eventually some novels. So I got involved with sci-fi literature, and of course, Apocalypse Rising. And then this year I ended up with the military sci-fi media as a fifth track, which is absolutely amazing. So I've done some stuff on multiple different tracks. I love them all, but for this year, probably my favorite was a Space Track panel called If We Could Talk with the Aliens. And it was Chuck Gannon, Les Johnson, Douglas Talk, and myself. And all four of us have been on panels with each other over many years, not all at the same time. I'm on lots of panels with Les. I'm on lots of panels with Chuck at DragonCon and with Doug in the Space Track. We didn't require a moderator. We just started talking, and the audience is sitting there like this the entire time. They're at rapt attention. And that's some of the best, when we didn't have a structure, we didn't have questions we were doing. We were just polite enough to let everybody talk, and yet still able to stay. Now, what you just said, let me extend that a little bit further, which then took us in a different direction, which took us somewhere totally different. Now, we didn't talk about talking to aliens all that much, but we talked about the concept of aliens and communication and space and UAPs, unidentified and aerial phenomena, and the like, and whether we thought they were real or whether they were really secret Earth tech that nobody was admitting to yet, and things like that. And so those type of panels are incredibly fun. And DragonCon excels at both the moderated panel. Science Track actually provides their own moderators. Volunteers in the track end up being the moderators for those, and so they have questions and everything like that. Those are fun. Those are great. And then some of the ones that are just free form, and we stay mostly on topic. There was another one we had that got way off topic, but it was okay because it was still fun. But I enjoy those, and that's part of what keeps me going back.
Yeah, definitely that. Just when you get that rapport with the people up there and back and forth, that's, I think, always when like the really good panels often happen. Greg, you're a lot of hanging out in the Filk world. What is that track like? Are there panels in the Filk like track, or is it mostly music, or how does that work?
Generally, they will bring in a slate of musicians as track performers, and they would usually have them run workshops occasionally. Andrew McKee will do a workshop on songwriting, or Mark Gunn will do a workshop on, I think his was in particular writing drinking songs. The Blibbering Humdingers in the past have done workshops with medieval instruments to introduce people to the croomhorn and other such devices. So they do some panels in and amongst the concerts and the general music sessions. I've been lucky enough to also be on some panels in science fiction literature, in the writing track in past years. And I think I was on a space track panel once long ago. A few years ago, one of the fantasy tracks had me on. It's kind of nice sometimes when some of the new folks or some new panel, some new track will pick you and say, "Hey, come, be a part of what we do."
Yeah.
So I hope that can keep on as well. I did think of one other thing, David, back to your question of something that I missed. For several years, my friend Alethea Contis used to run her traveling sideshow as part of the young adult literature track, and allowed me to come and play music and do skits and things there. She was not able to be there this year and has not been able to do the sideshow for quite some time, but that was always a lot of fun in a packed room with, from kids all the way up to grandparents, and just always a great time. So I do hope that one day she will be able to bring that back.
Yeah, sounds very cool. That's another thing which I don't think we can really speak to, but there is like a kids track and a young adult track and stuff at DragonCon too. So sort of like a cruise ship or something. They like keep them. I don't know where they keep them, but you'll occasionally see little Obi-Wan Kenobis wandering around. But well, we're kind of coming up on time here. Just any kind of closing thoughts about DragonCon that you feel like people should know, or tips if people, after they hear how awesome it is us talking, they're going to want to go next year. So any tips for first timers, or just any closing stories or thoughts that anybody has? I'd love to hear them. Like, yeah, Dave.
So I alluded to sort of getting work done at DragonCon. I never write the word count I think I'm going to write, because there's too many things to do. But what happens at DragonCon is you meet people. It's a great place to plan to meet people, you know, I mean, like you, David, right? It's a place where I can see you. We do not live in the same states. I get to see you a couple, 3 times a year in person. DragonCon is a place where I get to meet you and other pros, but also it's a place where you serendipitously meet people. So a few years ago, I want to say this is 2019. We could easily figure out the year. I was up in Rob Hampson's suite, standing in the corner with my back to the balcony, talking with then editor Jim Minns about whatever. And Jerry Pornell was sitting on a sofa. And
2019.
yeah, 2019. And Jerry stood up and walked over to me. And I didn't know him. And when he reached me, he looked at me and he said, "Oh, you're not who I thought you were." But then he didn't go sit down. He just kept talking. And he talked to me for 2 hours. And halfway through that, Larry Niven walked in, saw his friend Jerry, came over and stood next to Jerry. And I just sat there, and Jim and I said almost nothing, right? We'd say, "Oh, interesting. Oh, who was that? Oh, tell me more." As Jerry Pornell and then Jerry and Larry Niven just kind of downloaded on stories about people and stories about careers over, 60, 70 years of being science fiction novelists, right? And completely unplanned. I couldn't have engineered it if I tried. It's the kind of thing that can happen at DragonCon.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
I try to encourage people when they're like, well, how do I break in? Well, first you have to write a lot of stories and you have to read a lot of stories. But if you want to get involved in the industry, you got to start showing up and volunteering, but you've got to make appearances at these things. And you can't expect to just, I'm going to make this connection, everything will break wide open for me. It's like you go because you enjoy it and you're also playing the long game. You'll make connections with this person, and who knows, eventually they might have a connection somewhere else. You get to know people, and the more people you know, as long as you're not an asshat, and you show up and you do good work, if you represent well and you interact with people well, you're going to make these connections and they'll lead to other connections. But you can't go in with an agenda like Dave just said there. Stuff will just happen if you're there because all of these people who shared these interests of yours are going to be there too.
Yeah, I think that the key of that is that it is sort of like a accumulation over time. It's not like well, I met this person and they said, and it could happen. They said, "Send me the book," and now I'm a New York Times bestseller, right? But just sort of accumulating these connections. And the thing to me is, I think writing or editing, is kind of lonely in some ways. You're doing it in a room with a computer usually. And so to me, I always find any con it's sort of inspiring in a way. Like you see other people doing it, it makes it sort of real. You realize that there is this community. And so in that way, I think it's beneficial too, of you're not in this little bubble that you do have to be in to be a writer, but that there's also this wider world. I remember, I'm going to tell one quick story that Dave reminded me of. Is at the Baen brunch, and me and Aaron Michael Ritchie, Dave's co-writer, we're talking about Twin Peaks as we always do. Although we tamped that down this year, and we were sitting across from Mike Resnick. And he had sat down after us, so we were yammering on about Cooper and Laura Palmer, and I could tell he was like, we're being rude here, like we need to cut this off quickly, because it turned out Resnick had not watched television since like 1985. He said, like, right, he realized like something was going to have to give it his life, and so he's like, I literally have not watched anything on television since 1985. And so like we quickly wrapped up the Twin Peaks conversation, but then we got to talk to him, like, and he told us all about, his days writing, softcore novels, and and then sadly he died a few years later, and that was so cool, and that would not have happened. Obviously that was at sort of a closed event, the Baen brunch, but that's the kind of thing that can happen, like Dave's saying. And I don't think I got any professional benefit from that, but just to have that opportunity to sit down with somebody who I admired like that, and that would not have happened, if I'd stayed home. So that kind of thing too.
But sometimes, like Howard's saying, you do get professional. Like sometimes you meet an editor who then says, "Hey, you know what? I'm, putting together an anthology. I'd love to get a story from you," or and usually it is cumulative and it's one step at a time.
I one of the Baen brunches, I was an anthology editor, and several of the authors came up and says, "Okay, well, let me talk to you at the Baen brunch, and we'll talk over the story idea." And so I had like 3 different authors saying, "Okay, here's my story idea. Will this fit the anthology?" And I go, "Oh wow, yeah, I'm the guy that they're all talking to now," and it was really weird. But I have a follow up to uh, DJ's story about talking with Purnell, and that is that it was 2018, by the way, because
Because he
20.
died like a week later.
I know, but
Wow.
see, I know one of his sons rather well. I know Philip well. I've met Alex and talked with Alex on many occasions. They have both assured me he had the time of his life. He hadn't been to a convention like that, in a group like that, able to talk to fans and fellow authors alike to the extent that he did. Um, uh, and he went away from the convention talking about all of the new authors he'd met, all of the fans and readers he had talked to, all of his old friends. Last year, we had Greg Benford. Um, and I had met Greg a couple of times. I knew him, somewhat. We had crossed paths. We spent an awful lot of time talking. And then he hung out with us the one night we had the party. And there's a picture of him and Alan Steele and Larry Niven sitting on the couch talking, and a bunch of us sitting around talking with him. And Greg said, "This is like the old cons, where you sit and you've got a mixture of fans and authors around and you just talk and have a good time." The connections that you can make at DragonCon, if you're wanting to break in, go and listen. And the other thing is, sometimes sometimes the person on a panel has to rush to another panel. If you're trying to get from the Hilton to the Westin and you have a half an hour between panels, you've got, and the author or the panelist does, and they say, "Sorry, but I've got to rush to the Westin." If you're the fan or the aspiring author, you say, "Can I walk with you?" And you do that, and it's absolutely wonderful. And and then the person that you get to what your destination is, that person then turns and walks and goes to some other panel. That's fine, because you've just had an opportunity to walk and talk. And if they don't have something they're rushing off to, then talk to them a little bit after the panel, and then go out into the hallway and find a place to sit and talk and chat. Because I have found that so many of the panelists are willing to talk when someone comes up, and I try to be willing to talk too. You also hit the strangest coincidences. I had a young man come up to me after a panel and says, "Hey, Mr. Hampson, do you remember me from Boy Scouts?" And it's been 15 years. And he remembered me. And, when he told me his first name, I immediately, I recognized him, remembered, who he was, and said, "Oh, and, gave his last name, and he just broke into a smile. I'm in line for sushi in the food court. And actually, I was just got my orders walking out, and I had somebody else. And this time they said, "Hey, Dr. Hampson." And I go, "Wait a minute. The only ones that call me doctor are my students." And yeah, she was one of my students in there. And another of my former students is actually a panelist, and I was on panels with. The connections you make and the and the small world feeling. I mean, okay, so you're there with 65,000 of your closest friends, all packed into the same elevator. But it is, and if you thought that was a small world, wait until you start, finding the people from, from all walks of life that what are you doing here? It's so much fun. It's so much fun.
Gray, any thoughts? Closing thoughts? Tips?
I would just say, one, be prepared to be surprised. I was surprised at this DragonCon after an event. A fellow named Ira came up to me and held out a bag and said, "Pick something out." And I reached in, and he had a bag full of little 3D printed things, and what I got was a Santa Grogu that he had 3D printed, and he was just giving these things out. And secondly, on the subject of people who give things out, be on the lookout. If you go to DragonCon, you've never been before, be on the lookout for Duckman and the Duck Fairy, who hand out rubber duckies. And they get the greatest joy doing that. They have become a fixture. They generally lay in easily 10,000 rubber ducks just to give out at DragonCon every year.
Wow.
And they they do that to bring a smile to your face, and it puts a smile on their face as well. But just go with an open mind and plan to have fun, and no doubt you will.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, like we've said too, is you may want to go a few times, right? I mean, it can be expensive, I know, but I think the first time to me was, like I said, so cool, but like very overwhelming. But now it's like we've talked about, you meet these friends you see only there, and you get to know the secret. We still don't know the secret food court. You have to tune in next year for that update. But you get to know the secret code, and that guy, I remember that, the guy who dresses whatever, so it does have a great effect of year after year really becoming its own thing. So I want to thank the panel, everybody, Howard, speaker, Rob Hampson, Gray, and DJ Butler for coming on and talking about DragonCon. It is every Labor Day weekend in downtown Atlanta, and we hope to see you guys there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David.
Right.
And now we bring you our audiobook serialization of Tinker by Wen Spencer. Inventor girl genius Tinker lives in a near-future Pittsburgh, which now exists mostly in the land of the elves. She runs her salvage business, pays her taxes, and tries to keep the local ambient level of magic down with gadgets of her own design. When a pack of wargs chase an elven noble into her scrapyard, life as she knows it takes a serious detour. Tinker finds herself taking on the Elven Court, the NSA, the Elven Interdimensional Agency, technology smugglers, and a college-minded xenobiologist as she tries to stay focused on what's really important, her first date. Armed with an intelligence the size of a planet, steel-toed boots, and a junkyard dog attitude, Tinker is ready to kick butt to get her first kiss.
The impounded goods had been unloaded in a warehouse in the Strip District. Basically, just one low room a block long. The place fairly crawled with armed EIA. While security for the building ran high, lighting and climate control left much to be desired. Natural light came in from windows lining an upper walkway. Work lamps tacked to support columns provided additional light, plugged into jury-rigged electrical boxes, a newly strung Romex line. Because of the virgin forests occupying most of the western continent, Elfhome usually ran several degrees cooler than Earth. Since Pittsburgh suffered from high humidity, the lower temperatures were a blessing. The rainstorms of shutdown and startup over, a rare summer heat, however, had moved in. The warehouse's only nod toward climate control was ceiling fans, cloaked in the shadows high overhead, that barely moved the oven-like heat of the building. Tinker found herself wishing for shorts and a midriff shirt. In Maynard's company, She didn't even feel like unbuttoning her shirt. Sweat trickled down her back as she followed Maynard through trestle tables set up and loaded with smuggled goods. What she discovered made her forget the heat. There were digital boards, stripping kits, and connector kits. For fiber optics work, they had a full run of splice trays, hot melt connector systems, and a curing oven. She found a spool of gold wire, fault finders, microscanners, and status activity monitors. There were tech kits that set her mouth drooling, punch boxes, wire crimp tools, small precision mirrors. There were even new digital markers that laid out a metal-based ink held in a buckyball matrix. Tinker poked through the stuff, wishing she could take the lot back to her place. Lane had told her tales about the world beyond the rim, where such stuff was plentiful. Much as Tinker loved Pittsburgh, she had to admit that there was a true shortage of goods. Maynard interrupted her trolling to hand her a length of cable with a box at the end.
"Do you know what this is?"
Tinker took it. She turned it in her hands, studying it. The box was molded plastic with 2 power ports. She tried the various screwdrivers she had tucked into her pockets, the third being the charm, and undid the screws. Oh my, this is sexy.
"What is it?"
It's a power transformer.
"You recognize it?"
What's to recognize? This is a male 220 line, meaning you plug it into a 220 outlet. It would have a pull on par with an electric clothes dryer or an electric range. The female leads are typical magic connectors. It takes electrical power and transforms it to magic. The question is, what type of spell is it keyed to?
It would have to be keyed to only one spell?
There isn't any way to change the output frequency. It's preset. Although, if you knew the frequency it was outputting, then you could probably set up a secondary translation spell any time you wanted to use it for a different spell. You'll see a loss in power efficiency on the order of 11%, but at this amperage, such a power loss would be negligent. Shit, I could have used something like this on Windwolf. I'll have to build one.
You could build one of these?
Yeah, it wouldn't be too hard. Of course, there's the whole question of why bother. Here on Elfhome, there's enough magical power to fuel any spell without the cost of electrical energy. And on Earth, except for healing elves, there are already mechanical solutions for almost everything.
Magic doesn't work on Earth.
Does too. Tinker replaced the screws and tightened them down. The laws of the universe don't change just because you hop dimensions. The difference is the amount of magical power in the dimension. Think of magic as a waveform passing through multiple realities. Elfhome exists at the top of the wave. Magic is plentiful. Earth exists at the bottom of the wave. Magic is rare. Magic follows the laws of physics just like light, gravity, and time. I could show you the math, but it's fairly complex. There are types of radiation more common in one reality than the other, but lucky for us, the generation waveform seems larger, so we fall close enough on the curve that it doesn't affect either species adversely.
So you can do magic on Earth?
It's how I kept Windwolf alive, Tinker said. I had magic stored in a power sink and used it to feed a healing spell.
Can you tell what the smugglers might have been trying to build with all this?
Tinker shrugged. Not a clue. I'm afraid I don't have a criminal mind.
Make a wild guess.
She sighed, glancing around. Well, unless they scooted off with all the uncommon stuff, they're not going to make a wide range of items. I'm guessing all those power transformers are set to the same frequency, or else they would be labeled somehow. There's a lack of movable parts, so it's not like a car or bike or printing press. It's magic-based, either many scattered copies of one spell or one massive spell.
Can you tell what spell?
You'd better check with the elves for that. The best I can do is to match the frequency to a known spell, but my knowledge of magic is fairly limited. For all I know, they're going to change the population of Pittsburgh into frogs. Maynard sighed slightly, perhaps not looking forward to trying to pry information from the always obtuse elves.
Anything else?
Well, Tinker held out the power transformer. You could let me take this home and play with it. I can figure out the cycle on the magic output and search through my spell database for a match. It would at least start eliminating possibilities.
Take it then.
She lifted up the markers. I don't suppose I could have these as part of my payment? Was that a smile that tugged his mouth slightly sideways for 1 second?
You can have them.
Maynard produced a business card and presented it.
This is my direct number. If you figure anything out, give me a call. It is always answered.
Of course it was. He was God of Pittsburgh. There was no name on the card, only a phone number. Wow, God's private phone number. Tinker pocketed it. I'll let you know what I find out.
I'll take you home.
She wasn't comfortable with the idea of God knowing where she lived, although he certainly could find out easily enough. I've got some shopping to do before everything's gone. Could you just drop me at Market Square?
That was another installment in Wen Spencer's Tinker, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to everyone for discussing DragonCon today, and good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Shirirod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.